Right, so this review has 6 questions we're going to do together, and then the rest of the review you're going to practice on your own. So, starting at number 7, the review is very similar to what you're going to see on your test. So, what I did, I didn't do another calculator question for us to do together since Friday we did that we practiced that on the previous day. So you have one of those for you to do on your own that will be on the calculator part of the test. But this other stuff we hadn't practiced quite as recent. So I wanted to do some of those with you before you started doing the review on your own. So this test is going to have 2 parts, a calculator part and a non-calculator part. So like I just said, there will be a graph to find all the characteristics on the calculator part. The graph will be graphed for you like it is on number 7, but you would still need to use your calculator to get the relative max and min because they're not at an exact point. The rest of the stuff, you should be able to look at the graph and figure that out. So for number 1, we're asked to find the quotient. And finding the quotient, we are going to use synthetic division. And so when you're doing synthetic division, you need to double check that there weren't any terms that were skipped. And when I look at number 1, I can tell that the x term is skipped. So we have to make sure that we fill in a 0 for that x term. So when we're doing synthetic division, we do this box, and in that box, you're going to put the opposite of what is in your divisor. So that's a +2, so we'll put -2 in the box. All right, then we're going to bring over the coefficients from our dividend. Don't forget to put in the 0. And the first step, when we start doing the actual multiplying and adding, we're going to bring this first coefficient down under the line. And then we're going to multiply the number in the box by the number under the line, and we're going to get -6. And then we're going to add. We're going to add these together, and we're going to get -4. And then we're going to multiply again. We're going to multiply the number in the box by the number under the line, and we get 8. And when we add, we're going to get 8. And then we're going to multiply -2 times 8 is going to be -16. And then when we add, we are going to get -6. Now, this is on the calculator part, so you can use your calculator to do that if you need to. Okay, well, we're not finished, so our answer has to have x's and stuff in it. So if you guys remember, if you start with x to the third, this needs to be x squared, 1 less. So that's going to be 3x squared, and then that power goes down by 1 each time. So you get to your constant, and then your remainder is put over the divisor, so over this. That is finding the quotient using synthetic division. Okay, number 2 asks us to use the remainder theorem to determine if the given binomial is a factor of the function that's given. All right, so we're going to do synthetic division again. So since this is a -3, we're going to put +3. This time there weren't any terms that were skipped, so we don't have to fill in any zeros. We bring down that 1, and then we start multiplying the number in the box by the number under the line, and then adding, multiplying, and adding, multiplying, and adding. Now, if you guys remember the factor theorem, the only thing we care about is the remainder. If we get a remainder of 0, we're going to say yes, it is a factor. It divides evenly. If we get a remainder of anything else, then we're going to say no. All right. The next two questions have to do with end behavior. And so, if you guys remember, the leading coefficient tells us what happens on the right side of the graph. If the leading coefficient is positive, the right arrow is pointing up. If the leading coefficient is negative, the right arrow is pointing down. So if we look at the right arrow, it's pointing up. So I know that the leading coefficient is positive. Right? For the degree, that tells us what happens on the left. If there's an even degree, the arrows would point in the same direction. And if there's an odd degree, the arrows would point in opposite directions. When we look at this one, the arrows are pointing in opposite directions, so this is an odd degree. Okay, number 4, we need to choose all the functions that have this particular end behavior. And so this means that on the left side, the arrow is pointing upward towards positive infinity. And this means on the right side, the arrow is pointing downward towards negative infinity. So because the right is down, I automatically know that the leading coefficient is negative. All right, and then when I notice that the left is in the opposite direction of the right, I know that there's an odd degree. Okay, so my odd degree functions over here are these, because they have a leading degree. The largest exponent is an odd number. So out of those 4 that I selected, I want to actually check the ones that have, or choose the ones that have a negative leading coefficient. So that is going to be this one and this one. Okay. And then these last 2 questions, we're talking about zeros and multiplicity. So to fill out this table, we look at each factor and think about what's going to make that equal to 0. So if we have an x with no addition or subtraction, that 0 is always going to just be 0. All right. If I do have addition or subtraction and there's not a number in front of the x, I'm just going to use the opposite for my 0. All right, then if I have a situation like this where there is a number in front of x, we can do one of 2 things. We can set it equal to 0 and solve for x by subtracting 3 and dividing by 4. Or we can still do the opposite and have that negative 3, but because there's a number in front of x, we would need to divide by it or put it in the denominator on the bottom. So however you need to do it, you'll need to figure out a way to figure out the 0 when there's a number in front of your x. All right, and then for the multiplicity, that's just going to go through and write down the powers for each of those zeros. All right, now effect is either going to be crosses or bounces. Now it's going to cross when there's an odd multiplicity and going to bounce when there's an even multiplicity. All right, so 3 is an odd number, so we're going to say crosses. 2 is an even number, so we're going to write bounces. And then 5 is an odd number, so it's going to be crosses. Okay. And then for number 6, we're going to find a function that has these zeros, and we're just going to write it in factored form. So we have those zeros with those multiplicities. So if your 0 is 0, it's going to be a situation like this, where it's just going to be x to some power. Now the power here is going to be 4 because it had a multiplicity of 4. Okay. For a 0 of -1, now we have to have an x, and then we're going to do the opposite. So since this is a -1, our factor will be x plus 1. And then we're going to have that multiplicity of 5. And then for the last one, we're going to have the x. Since this is a +3, we'll do -3. And then our multiplicity for that one is 2. So it has a power or an exponent of 2. All right. So I've done one like each of them except for the very first one, but we practiced that quite a bit recently. So what I want you guys to do is the next 2 pages. So the next page, you can use a calculator on your test. So go ahead and use a calculator today if you need one. And then the last page is a non-calculator page. You shouldn't need a calculator to do those things. There's no computations to do.